The tension in the room lingered, the air thick with anticipation as the Wells family and their alternate selves stood together, gathering their strength after the grueling battle. The hooded man still loomed, his presence palpable, somewhere in the depths of the ancient fortress. The echoes of their earlier fight seemed to reverberate through the stone walls, a reminder that their true enemy was still out there, waiting. Claire's grip on Cody tightened as she moved toward alternate Jade and Mallory, her emotions finally spilling over in the form of quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice strained. She looked into their eyes, taking in their exhaustion, but more importantly, their shared determination. "You saved Cody's life. I don't know what we would have done if..." She trailed off, her voice cracking as she squeezed Cody's shoulder. Alternate Jade's stoic expression softened as he offered a small smile, still catching his breath. He had worn a hard exterior during the battle, but now that they had a brief moment of peace, his humanity shone through. "You don't have to thank me," he replied, his voice low but sincere. "We protect our own. It doesn't matter which universe we come from, family is family." Mallory, his brow furrowed as he processed the strange sight of his alternate self standing just feet away, couldn't hold his tongue any longer. He crossed his arms, staring down alternate Mallory's outfit, his dark, hooded assassin-like garb resembling something straight out of a video game. He couldn't help but snort. "Really?" Mallory raised an eyebrow. "You had to go with the Assassin's Creed look? I would never wear something like that. What's with the hood and all the edgy gear?" Alternate Mallory smirked, his eyes gleaming with amusement as he crossed his own arms, mirroring his counterpart's stance. "Hey, it works. You should try it sometime. It's got a certain flair. Besides, we don't all have to dress like we're about to go hiking through the woods." His teasing was light, but there was a mischievous undertone in his voice. Valerie chuckled from the side, eyeing both versions of her uncle. "I don't know, Uncle Mallory. I think it suits him. The whole dark assassin vibe is kind of your thing in another universe, I guess." Mallory scowled, though there was no real bite behind it. "Yeah, well, remind me never to let my fashion sense get that bad." Cody chimed in with a grin. "Honestly, I think it looks kind of cool. You've got to admit, Uncle Mallory, the other version of you pulls it off." Mallory rolled his eyes, but didn't push further. He turned his attention back to the task at hand, the teasing moment between them doing little to ease the weight of what they were about to face. Jade stepped forward, clearing his throat, redirecting the conversation back to the gravity of the situation. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. His gaze moved to the massive doors that led to the hooded man's chamber, their next and final destination. "The hooded man is still waiting for us, and we have to finish this." But reaching the hooded man's chamber wasn't going to be easy. Jade, ever the strategist, glanced around the room. "We have to be careful. His power manipulates the very fabric of time in this fortress. We'll likely face traps and time shifts along the way." Valerie's gaze hardened as she followed her father's line of sight toward the corridor. "He's in there," she said quietly, her hands tightening around her weapon. "I can feel it. He's been waiting for this moment." Alternate Jade's eyes narrowed as he stepped toward the corridor, his expression grim. "Then let's not keep him waiting any longer." They set off as a group, cautiously making their way through the winding corridors of the ancient fortress. The stone walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if time itself was warping and shifting around them. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the flickering torches cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Suddenly, they encountered the first trap, a corridor filled with intricate time-altering phases. The air shimmered and distorted, and as they stepped forward, their movements slowed to a crawl, as if the very passage of time had been manipulated. "We're in a time loop," Cody muttered, his voice strained as he struggled to move forward. "It's trying to trap us here." Alternate Mallory cursed under his breath, his eyes scanning the corridor for a way out. We have to push through. Stay close. Jade raised his hand, his kismet abilities flaring as he sent a wave of energy through the corridor, temporarily disrupting the time distortion. Go! He shouted, and the group surged forward, moving through the warped passage as fast as they could. As they reached the other side, they found themselves in another chamber, this one filled with strange floating orbs of energy that flickered with chaotic bursts of light. The orbs seemed to represent different timelines, each one distorting and bending reality in unpredictable ways. Don't touch them, Valerie warned, her eyes narrowed in concentration. They'll throw us into alternate timelines. We have to stay on our path. Carefully, they navigated the room, ducking and weaving between the orbs as they flickered dangerously close. Mallory, ever the pragmatist, grunted as one of the orbs nearly grazed him. This place is a damn maze. Finally, after what felt like hours of traversing the time-twisted corridors, the Wells family and their alternate counterparts arrived at the doors to the hooded man's chamber. They paused, the tension thick in the air as they gathered themselves for the final confrontation. Valerie's heart pounded in her chest, her palms slick with sweat as she gripped her weapon. Jade stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Valerie, he said softly, his voice steady, you're going to lead the attack. You're the strongest of us, and we need your power to trap him. But we'll be right there with you. She blinked, startled by the sudden weight of responsibility placed on her shoulders. Me? Why does it have to be me? You're the strongest of us. Alternate Jade echoed, stepping forward. The hooded man doesn't know what you're capable of. You're our wild card, and with all of us supporting you, you'll have the power to imprison him where he can't cause any more damage. Claire's eyes filled with concern as she glanced between Jade and Valerie. Are you sure this is the best way, Jade? The hooded man is dangerous. What if something goes wrong? What if Valerie gets hurt? Jade met her gaze, his voice gentle but unwavering. Nothing will go wrong. We'll be with her. We've trained for this moment, and we're ready. Together, we're strong enough to stop him. Valerie took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. She had faced many battles alongside her family, but this was different. The weight of responsibility hung heavy on her, but there was no turning back now. All right? She said, her voice steady. If it has to be me, then I'm ready. Cody stepped up beside his sister, his face set with determination. You're not doing this alone. We're all in this together. The hooded man doesn't stand a chance. Mallory, though still skeptical, gave a begrudging nod. Fine. Let's do this. But I swear, if this plan goes sideways, I'm going straight to plan B, punching his face in. Alternate Mallory chuckled darkly. You and me both. Jade nodded, and one by one, the Wells family and their alternate selves placed their hands on their chests, closing their eyes. A soft, mist-like energy began to flow from each of them, swirling in the air like tendrils of power before it converged on Valerie. The Kismet energy wrapped around her like a protective shield, empowering her, amplifying her strength. Valerie felt the surge of energy course through her, the combined power of her family flowing into her like a river of light. Her body began to glow, the radiant energy pulsing through her veins as she stood taller, more confident. With the plan set, they finally approached the hooded man's chamber. The tension in the air grew thicker with each step. The heavy doors creaked as they swung open, revealing the hooded man standing at the far end of the vast, shadowy room. His glowing eyes watched them with eerie calm, his presence a chilling reminder of the power he held over time. So, the hooded man's voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking, you've come to face me at last. I've been expecting you. Jade stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with resolve. This ends today, hooded man. You've manipulated time for long enough. We're here to stop you. The hooded man laughed, the sound hollow and filled with malice. You think you can stop me? I control time itself. I've seen the future, the past, and everything in between. You are nothing compared to me. Jade clenched his fists, but held his ground, his eyes narrowing at the hooded man's words. You think because you can control time, you control everything? You pulled my family into this chaos, and you've torn lives apart. But today, it ends. The hooded man's smile widened, a sinister gleam in his glowing eyes. Ah, but you misunderstand, Jade. I didn't just tear your family into this chaos. I started it. I was the one who pulled you into the time portal all those many years ago. Jade froze, his heart skipping a beat. For so long, he had wondered who or what had reached through that portal in his lab and yanked him into the future. He had never known who was behind it, until now. You. Jade's voice faltered slightly, but then it grew more forceful. You're the one who pulled me through the portal that night? Why? Why did you do it? The hooded man's expression remained calm, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and dark intent. He took a few steps forward, his voice lowering to a conversational tone as if they were merely discussing a casual matter. You were meddling in forces you didn't understand. The hooded man said, his voice almost casual. Time is not a toy to be tinkered with in a backyard lab. When you opened that portal, you breached the fabric of time itself, and I couldn't allow such an opportunity to pass me by. You had potential, Jade Wells, but you were naive. I pulled you through because I knew your brilliance could be useful to me, and in a way, it was. Jade's mind raced as he processed the hooded man's words. The confusion, the fear, the desperation he had felt when he had been ripped from his timeline all those years ago came flooding back. His voice grew harder, more accusatory. You used me. You manipulated me for your own gain. The hooded man's smile faded slightly, his expression turning more serious. Yes, I used you. But don't mistake my intentions. I didn't just want to destroy you, Jade. I wanted to see if you could rise above your limitations. If you could harness the true power of time, as I have. I thought perhaps, in the future, you might become an ally, a fellow master of time. Jade's eyes blazed with anger, his fists clenching at his sides. An ally? You dragged me away from my family, left me stranded in a future I didn't understand, and for what? To see if I would join you in your twisted view of time? I would never be like you. The hooded man shrugged, his voice cold and indifferent. Perhaps. But you must admit, you've come far since that night. You've unlocked powers that few can even comprehend. In a way, I helped shape you into who you are today. Jade's jaw tightened, his anger boiling beneath the surface. You didn't shape me. My family did. The people I love are what gave me strength, not your manipulation. The hooded man tilted his head slightly, his glowing eyes narrowing as he regarded Jade with a calculating gaze. Love, such a fragile thing. It binds you, weakens you. Time is the only true power in this world. And I alone control it. Jade shook his head, his voice filled with conviction. No. You don't control time. You abuse it. And that ends now. The hooded man's smile faltered as he sensed the power building within Jade. His glowing eyes flickered with unease as the air around them began to hum with energy. What are you doing? The hooded man demanded, his voice wavering for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty creeping into his tone. Jade, Cody, Mallory, Claire, and the alternate versions of Jade and Mallory all raised their hands, channeling their energy toward Valerie. The room seemed to tremble as the Wells family's kismet abilities converged, the very fabric of time itself bending under their combined will. Valerie's body began to glow with a fierce, radiant light as the power coursed through her. The hooded man's eyes widened in fear as he realized what was happening. He took a step back, his voice rising in desperation. No, you can't. Valerie's voice rang out, filled with the combined strength of her family. You've caused enough chaos. It's time you answered for your crimes. With a fierce shout, Valerie unleashed the full force of her family's energy, projecting it toward the hooded man. The power struck him, wrapping around him like chains forged from the very essence of time itself. He screamed in fury, thrashing against the invisible bonds, but it was no use. Time twisted and folded around him, imprisoning him in a moment from which he could never escape. The room shook as the time prison solidified, locking the hooded man in place. His screams echoed through the chamber before fading into a haunting silence. The Wells family stood together, watching as the hooded man's form shimmered and vanished, trapped in a void beyond the reach of time. Valerie lowered her hand, her body trembling as the glow around her faded. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes wide with disbelief. It's done. Jade approached her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. You did it, Val. You stopped him. Claire rushed forward, wrapping her daughter in a tight embrace. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You were amazing. Mallory, still catching his breath, smirked at Valerie. Guess we didn't need to resort to punching him after all. Alternate Jade and Mallory stepped forward, their expressions a mixture of relief and pride. You guys did it. Alternate Jade said, his voice filled with admiration. But there's still more to do. Before anyone could respond, a shimmering light filled the room, and two figures materialized near the far wall. Yemelith, radiant and graceful, stepped forward with Lorien at her side, his commanding presence both comforting and intimidating. Their expressions were unreadable, but there was a softness in Yemelith's eyes, a sense of relief mingled with pride. My sons, Yemelith said, her voice both gentle and powerful as she looked at Jade and Mallory. You have done what no one thought possible. The hooded man is defeated, and the timeline is safe once again. But there is something more you deserve to know. She paused for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the tall, silver-eyed man standing beside her. This is Lorien, your father. Jade took a step forward, his breath still heavy from the battle, his mind racing with questions. Father? His voice was tinged with emotion. Why now? Why didn't you come to us sooner? Lorien's eyes met Jade's, and for a moment, the weight of centuries seemed to hang between them. I am a time guardian, he said, his voice deep and calm. My duty has always been to protect the timeline, to maintain balance. But as your father, I was bound by rules, ancient ones that prevented me from interfering in your lives until the time was right. I watched you from afar, ensuring that you would grow into the men you were meant to be. Mallory, who had been standing back with his arms crossed, as if trying to shield himself from the flood of emotions, finally spoke. His voice was sharp, filled with the frustration that had been building up inside him. So, we're just supposed to accept that we've been lied to our whole lives? That we're part of some ancient race of time-wielding beings, and you never thought to tell us? His gaze darted between Yemelith and Lorien, the hurt clear in his eyes. Yemelith stepped closer to Mallory, her expression sorrowful. I did what I had to protect you both. If the truth had been revealed too soon, the hooded man would have found you before you were ready. Your powers were always within you, but they needed time to grow, to awaken. Now, you stand ready to shape your own destiny. Mallory clenched his fists, looking down at the ground for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he lifted his gaze to Lorien. And you? Where were you when we needed you? All these years, you weren't there. Lorien's silver eyes never wavered, meeting Mallory's gaze with a steady calm. His voice, though controlled, carried the weight of centuries. I was bound by the same rules as Yemelith. I could not interfere directly in your lives. But I was never far. I watched over you both, making sure you grew strong, making sure you were ready for what was coming. My absence wasn't by choice. Mallory scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. So, what? We're supposed to just be grateful? You weren't there when we needed you. Jade placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. Mallory, I get it. It's a lot to take in. But we've always been more than just who we thought we were. We've always had this power inside us. Maybe it's time we accept that. Mallory turned to face his brother, the frustration in his eyes slowly giving way to understanding. I know, Jade. It's just, I don't know how to reconcile all of this. We've been through so much. Yemelith moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Mallory's cheek. I know you've struggled, my son. But you have both proven yourselves time and time again. The Wells family, your family, is stronger together. And now that you know the truth, you will be even more powerful. Claire, who had been standing back quietly, stepped forward, her voice filled with both curiosity and warmth. What does this mean for all of us? The Kismets, the Time Guardians, where do we go from here? Lorian's gaze shifted to Claire, and his expression softened. Your family has done more than anyone could have expected. You've maintained the timeline when others would have faltered. Going forward, you are free to choose your path. The burden of time will no longer rest solely on your shoulders. Yemelith added, you are part of something much larger, but you also have the freedom to live the lives you choose. The Kismets are not bound to a singular destiny. Valerie, who had been listening intently, stepped forward, her brow furrowed in thought. So, what now? We've stopped the hooded man, but we all know that time is fragile. Is there really a way to keep it safe forever? Lorian nodded slowly. The balance of time will always be precarious. There will always be threats, from within and without. But the Wells family is no longer alone. There are others who guard the timeline, sentinels, guardians, and now you. Together, you can protect what has been restored. As the room settled into a quiet hum after Lorian's words, the Wells family took a moment to absorb everything that had been revealed. Jade, Mallory, Claire, Valerie, and Cody exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and uncertainty hanging in the air. The hooded man was defeated, but there were still so many questions about what the future held. The weight of their legacy as Kismets and protectors of the timeline was a lot to bear, but for now, they had a brief moment of peace. Just as the stillness began to take root, a sudden ripple of energy crackled at the far side of the room. A shimmering portal opened, and a new figure stepped through, her presence commanding yet strangely comforting. Her dark, flowing robes billowed slightly as she moved, her sharp eyes scanning the room before landing on Valerie. She had an ethereal beauty, her silver hair cascading down her back, and her violet eyes seemed to hold the weight of the cosmos. Lorian turned his head and nodded in recognition. Iris, he said calmly. You've arrived at the right time. The woman, Iris, nodded back but kept her focus on Valerie, her eyes filled with curiosity and recognition. She stepped forward slowly, and as she did, Valerie felt an odd stirring in her chest, as if she had met this woman before. Valerie, Iris said softly, her voice almost melodic, though tinged with mystery. Do you remember me? Valerie blinked, confusion crossing her features. I'm not sure. Should I? Iris gave a small, understanding smile. It was many years ago. You were much younger. It was the day you brought your father home, after pulling him from the future. Valerie's eyes widened as memories began to flood back, hazy but vivid enough to stir something deep within her. You. She whispered, her voice shaking slightly. You're the one who found us. You're the one who told me, you told me I was special. That I would do great things. Iris nodded, stepping closer until she stood just a few feet from Valerie. Yes. And you have, Valerie. You have done more than anyone could have imagined. But there is still much more ahead of you. Valerie glanced at her family, her heart pounding as she tried to piece everything together. Why did you say that back then? Why tell me I was special? You knew something, didn't you? Iris' gaze softened, and she placed a gentle hand on Valerie's shoulder. When I met you all those years ago, I could sense the power within you. Not just the power of a kismet, but something far greater. You have a connection to time that few others possess. It's why you were able to find your father and pull him back from the future when no one else could. Your potential is limitless. Valerie's brow furrowed as she tried to process what Iris was saying. But I don't understand. If I'm so powerful, why didn't I know? Why didn't I feel it until now? Iris stepped back slightly, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes, power lies dormant until it is needed most. You have always had this within you, Valerie. But it wasn't time for you to fully awaken. The battles you've faced with your family, the trials you've overcome, each one has been preparing you for something far greater. You are destined to play a key role in the protection of time itself. Valerie shook her head, her mind spinning with the weight of the revelation. I've always just done what needed to be done. I never thought of myself as special or destined for anything. I just wanted to help my family. And that, Iris said with a warm smile, is exactly why you are special. Your strength comes from your selflessness, from your love for your family. That is what makes you different from the hooded man, from anyone who seeks to exploit time. You seek to protect, not control. Valerie's eyes flickered with uncertainty. But what does that mean for me? For my future? Iris' expression turned more serious, though there was still a tenderness in her eyes. It means that you are not just a guardian of time, you are its guide. You will not only protect the timeline, but you will also help shape it. Your choices will ripple throughout time, affecting not just your world, but others as well. And that is why you must be prepared. Valerie took a deep breath, her heart pounding with the weight of Iris' words. So, what now? What do I do next? Iris smiled, a twinkle of pride in her violet eyes. For now, you rest. You've just faced one of the greatest threats the timeline has ever known, and you emerged victorious. But soon, your powers will grow even stronger, and when the time comes, you will know what to do. You will feel it. Valerie's mind raced with questions, but something about Iris' calm presence made her feel grounded. She nodded slowly, accepting the strange truth of what had been revealed. I'll be ready, she said, her voice stronger now. Iris gave her a small nod, her smile warm and reassuring. I know you will. As Iris began to step back, Valerie couldn't help but ask one more question. Why me? Out of all the kismets, all the people who could protect time, why am I the one who has this connection? Iris paused, her gaze softening even further. Because you are more than just a kismet, Valerie. You are a beacon of hope in a universe that often teeters on the edge of chaos. You see time not as a weapon, but as something precious, something worth saving. That is why you are special. That is why you were chosen. Valerie felt a lump rise in her throat, the weight of Iris' words settling deep in her chest. She nodded again, this time more resolute, feeling a newfound strength within herself. Iris smiled one last time before stepping back toward the portal, her form already beginning to shimmer as she prepared to leave. We will meet again, Valerie. And when we do, you will be ready. With that, the portal closed behind her, leaving Valerie standing in quiet contemplation. The rest of the Wells family watched her, their expressions filled with pride and curiosity, knowing that this was only the beginning of Valerie's journey. As the conversation settled into a comfortable rhythm, alternate Jade and Mallory exchanged a glance, their shared experiences evident in the subtle tension between them. Jade caught the look and gave a slight nod, stepping forward to address his counterparts. His voice was calm but carried an underlying urgency. Before we leave, there's something else we need to discuss. Jade turned toward his alternate self, noticing the weight of their shared past reflected in his counterpart's eyes. What is it? Alternate Jade hesitated, a shadow crossing his face as he looked at Mallory, then back at Jade. He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself for the memories. It's about the hooded man, and his brother, Lori Ox. You need to know the full story of what happened. Jade listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. Go on. Alternate Jade exhaled slowly before continuing. The hooded man wasn't always the monster he is now. He had a brother, Loriox. Loriox was the opposite of him, good, kind, always trying to do what was right. But when the mask of Merithium came into their lives, everything changed. Lori thought he could stop his brother by taking the mask from him, believing he could destroy it. But things didn't go as planned. Mallory, who had been silent up until now, tilted his head. The mask of Merithium, that's the same artifact we just dealt with, right? Alternate Jade nodded, his expression darkening. Yes. But in our world, Loriox tried to use the mask for good, to take it away from his brother. He believed that if he wore it, he could somehow counter its effects, maybe even destroy it. But the mask doesn't work that way. Once he put it on, it began to consume him. Jade's heart sank, realizing the weight of what had happened. So, Loriox, he couldn't resist it? No. Alternate Jade said quietly, the pain of the memory clear in his voice. The mask twisted him, just like it did to his brother. It fed on his good intentions, corrupting him from the inside out. He wasn't the same man after that. He became just as dangerous as the hooded man. Mallory asked softly, what did you do? Alternate Jade's gaze dropped to the ground, his voice barely a whisper. I tried to save him. I fought him, trying to get the mask off, knowing it was the only way to bring him back. And I managed it, barely. I got the mask off him, but it was too late. The power of the mask had already ravaged his body. Loriox, he didn't make it. Jade's breath caught as he listened, feeling the weight of his counterpart's loss. I'm sorry. Alternate Jade nodded, his expression filled with sorrow. After Loriox died, the hooded man showed up. He didn't even mourn his brother. All he cared about was the power of the mask. He wanted it for himself. Anne. I almost killed him. Mallory blinked in surprise. You almost killed the hooded man? Alternate Jade clenched his fists, his voice trembling as he spoke. Yes. After everything he'd done, after Loriox died, I was filled with so much anger. I had the chance to end it right there, to stop him for good. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't take a life, even his. Jade took a step closer, his voice gentle but firm. You made the right choice. Killing him wouldn't have brought Loriox back, and it would have made you like him. You don't have to bear that burden. Alternate Jade's eyes met Jade's, and there was a flicker of gratitude there. I know. But sometimes, it feels like it wasn't enough. The hooded man is still out there, still causing destruction. And every time I think about how close I came to stopping him, I wonder if I made a mistake. Jade placed a hand on his counterpart's shoulder, his voice filled with understanding. You chose to stay true to who you are. You didn't let him turn you into something you're not. That's not a mistake, it's strength. And it's why we're going to win this fight. Alternate Jade exhaled, a hint of relief in his eyes. Thank you. I've been carrying that guilt for a long time. Mallory, his arms crossed, spoke up. And the hooded man? What did he do after Loriox died? A dark shadow crossed Alternate Jade's face. He didn't care that his brother was gone. All he saw was the power the mask could give him. He became obsessed with it, and that obsession is what's driving him now. Loriox was the only thing keeping him tethered to any sense of humanity. Without him, the hooded man has nothing left but his lust for control. Jade's heart ached for the loss of Loriox, but more than that, for the twisted soul of the hooded man, who had lost his last connection to good. We'll stop him. He said quietly, but with certainty. Not by becoming like him, but by showing him that power isn't the answer. Alternate Jade nodded, though the pain of the past still lingered in his eyes. You're right. And I need your help to do it. Cody, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward and met the eyes of his alternate father. "I haven't forgotten my promise," he said firmly. "We'll help you. But like we said, we need to rest first. This fight took a lot out of us." Jade glanced at Claire and Valerie, both of whom nodded in agreement. "We'll help," he said, looking back at his alternate self. "Your family. We're not going to turn our backs on you." Alternate Mallory let out a relieved breath, his voice softer now. "Good. We've been holding on by a thread back in our world. Knowing we have you all with us, that changes everything." Lorien stepped forward once more, his hand rising as a shimmering portal began to form in the air behind the alternate versions of Jade and Mallory. "It's time for you to return to your world," he said, his voice steady and calm. "But know this, there is still much work to be done. The battle continues in the parallel universe, and you will need all of your strength for what lies ahead." Alternate Jade gave a small nod of gratitude to the Wells family. "Thank you," he said quietly, but the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "We'll see you on the other side." As the portal shimmered, the alternate versions of Jade and Mallory stepped through, their figures vanishing into the swirling vortex of light. Jade, Mallory, and the rest of the Wells family stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the promise they had made lingering in the air. Jade turned to Mallory, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "We've got more to do, don't we?" Mallory nodded, his gaze distant but determined. "Yeah. But we'll face it. Just like we always do." As alternate Jade and Mallory stepped through the portal, there was a moment of quiet resolve that settled over the room. The Wells family had won this battle, but the weight of the future still lingered. The hooded man was defeated, but time itself remained fragile. Jade stood beside Claire, watching as the portal shimmered and closed. "It's not over, is it?" Claire asked quietly, her hand slipping into his. Jade shook his head, his gaze distant but determined. "No. It's never really over. But we're ready for whatever comes next." Valerie, Cody, and Mallory joined them, the family standing together in a brief moment of peace. Yemlith and Lorien remained in the background, their presence a reminder of the Wells family's deeper connection to the timeline, but also of the choices that lay ahead. As the Wells family turned to leave the chamber, there was an unspoken understanding between them. The battle was far from over, and their journey was only just beginning. The Wells family would face them together. The chamber grew quieter as the last echoes of the battle faded, leaving the Wells family standing in the aftermath of their victory. The hooded man was defeated, trapped in a prison of time from which he could never escape. Yet, despite the gravity of their success, there was a heavy sense of finality in the air, as if the weight of their journey had finally caught up to them. Jade glanced at his family, taking in the sight of Claire, Valerie, Cody, and Mallory, each of them showing the signs of exhaustion, both physical and emotional. Their battle scars were still fresh, their minds still racing from what they had just experienced. He knew they were all thinking the same thing: they had won, but at what cost? And was it really over? Lorien and Yemlith stood at the far end of the chamber, their regal forms illuminated by the residual glow of their cosmic energy. Lorien, with his towering presence and ancient knowledge, and Yemlith, their mother, whose grace and power radiated from her in quiet waves. The time had come for farewells, and as much as Jade felt the pull of his parents' presence, he knew it was time to return home. Lorien stepped forward, his silver eyes reflecting the light in the room. "It's time for you to go home," he said, his voice deep and calm, though there was a gentleness in his tone that hadn't been there before. "You've earned your rest, and your world awaits you." Jade nodded, stepping closer to Lorien and Yemlith, his gaze serious but filled with a quiet gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice firm but carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "For helping us understand who we are. And for giving us the strength to face this battle." Yemlith's eyes shone with emotion as she stepped forward to embrace her sons. First, she hugged Mallory, who stiffened at first but then relaxed into her embrace, his usual guarded nature softening for a moment. Then she turned to Jade, wrapping her arms around him with a tenderness that only a mother could offer. "You are both stronger than I ever could have hoped," Yemelith whispered as she pulled back to look at them. "I will always be with you, even if we are apart. You carry our legacy in your hearts, and that will guide you, no matter what challenges come your way." Mallory cleared his throat, trying to mask the emotion that was building up inside him. He glanced at Lorien, his expression a mix of curiosity and lingering resentment. "So, what now? We're supposed to go back to our lives, knowing everything that's happened?" Lorien regarded Mallory with a steady gaze, his expression unreadable but compassionate. "You are free to choose your own path, Mallory. You've earned that right. But remember, your strength lies in your family. You may have once felt that you were alone, but you have never truly been so." Mallory let out a long breath, the tension in his shoulders finally easing as he gave a small nod. "Yeah. I guess you're right." Jade stepped forward, his eyes meeting Lorien's. "We'll always be ready, no matter what happens next," he said quietly, then glanced at Claire and the rest of his family. "But right now, we need to go home. We need to get back to our lives." Lorien gave a slight nod of understanding and raised his hand, summoning a new portal, the shimmering light swirling with hues of blue and white. The portal shimmered with energy, a gateway leading back to their world, back to the normalcy they had fought so hard to protect. Yemelith smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Go now, and rest. You have earned your peace. But remember, should you ever need us, we are only a thought away." Jade turned back to his family, giving Claire a reassuring smile. "Let's go home," he said softly, and without hesitation, they stepped toward the portal, the light of the vortex enveloping them as they crossed the threshold back into their own world. The familiar scent of pine trees and the cool breeze greeted them as they stepped out of the portal and found themselves standing in the forest just outside their home. The sky was a rich orange as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the trees. It was a peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the chaos and danger they had just left behind. For a moment, the Wells family stood in silence, simply taking in the serenity of their surroundings. The tension in the air began to ease, and the exhaustion that had been weighing on them seemed to lift, if only slightly. Claire broke the silence first, exhaling a deep breath as she leaned into Jade's side. "We're really home," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of relief and disbelief. "It's over." Jade nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Yeah," he murmured. "It's over." Cody stepped forward, glancing back at the portal, which had now closed behind them. "But it's not really over, is it? There's still so much that's unresolved." His voice was contemplative, as if he were still processing everything that had happened. Valerie crossed her arms, her brow furrowed in thought. The alternate versions of Dad and Uncle Mallory. They're still fighting their own battle. And we promised to help them. Mallory, who had been silent for a moment, let out a frustrated sigh. "Yeah, and I can't stop thinking about how we just left them to deal with their own hooded man. They're still out there, and who knows how bad things are in their world." Jade turned to face his family, his expression serious. "We didn't leave them to deal with it alone. We promised we'd help, and we will. But we needed to come back and regroup. We've been through a lot, and we need to be ready when we go to their world." Claire nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at each of her children. "We're not abandoning them. We just need to be prepared. We've been fighting non-stop, and we need to rest." Valerie sighed, brushing a hand through her hair. "I know, but it just feels like there's always another battle waiting for us." Jade stepped closer to his daughter, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "There will always be challenges, Val. But we've proven that we can face them, together. And we will help the alternate Jade and Mallory. Their family too, even if they're from a different world. Cody sat down on a nearby log, his hands resting on his knees as he gazed thoughtfully at the ground. It's strange, though, isn't it? Seeing versions of Dad and Uncle Mallory from another universe. It's like looking into a mirror, but everything's just a little off. Mallory let out a humorless chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, and apparently the other version of me thinks he looks good in an assassin's costume. Still can't believe that. Valerie smirked, nudging him playfully. Come on, Uncle Mallory, admit it, he pulled it off. Mallory rolled his eyes, but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Yeah, well, I still wouldn't be caught dead wearing that. Jade chuckled softly, shaking his head. The alternate versions of ourselves, they've been through their own battles, faced their own demons. We don't know their whole story, but we do know they're fighting for the same things we are: family, hope, and a future free from the hooded man's control. Claire looked around at her family, her heart swelling with pride and love for each of them. No matter what happens next, we'll face it together. That's what makes us strong. Mallory, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed, let out a long breath. I guess I never expected to have this much family, from another universe, no less. But you're right, Jade. We'll help them. Just like we helped each other. Cody stood up, his resolve clear. So, what's next? When do we go back and help them? Jade glanced around at his family, then up at the sky, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow over the forest. We rest, he said. For now, we take time to recover, to plan, and to be with each other. But when the time comes, we'll be ready. We'll go back, and we'll finish what we started. Valerie nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. Together. And with that, the Wells family turned and began the walk back to their home, the forest around them quiet and peaceful. The battle they had fought was over, but they knew that their journey was far from complete. There were still worlds to save, still timelines to protect, and still family to stand by. But for now, they were home. And together, they would face whatever came next. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of time and space, another world awaited their help, a parallel universe, where new dangers and old enemies waited in the shadows.